Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at higher education hiring strategies. I know a lot of you out there are probably in universities or colleges or thinking about working at one. And so we're going to be looking at, what's going on out there in the world in terms of attracting talent in higher ed. We've got a mix of really interesting sources, a lot of great expert insights, some data-driven analysis. And yeah, one thing that's very, very clear is that the old post and pray method of just throwing a job ad up on a job board and hoping for the best, those days are long gone. One thing that I found super interesting in the research was just, millennials and Gen Z, their perception of higher ed careers. It's not always matching up with reality. And also just thinking about, the impact of remote work, how universities are competing with these giant corporations for talent. So much to unpack there. And to help us do that, I've got an expert here with me today who really, lives and breathes all things higher ed trends. So what's the most fascinating thing that jumped out at you in the research?
Well, I think the most fascinating thing, and maybe not surprising, is just how much the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the game. We're seeing just this wave of early retirements from higher ed, people wanting a lot more flexibility in terms of remote work, and then these corporate salaries that are often, much higher than universities can offer. It's a really tough combination.
So universities are trying to attract new talent, but they're also trying to figure out how to keep the amazing people they already have. The real balancing act.
Absolutely. And I think, Jared Canuzé, the CEO of academicjobs.com, he said something that really resonated with me. He said, instead of always focusing on filling, vacant positions, universities should really prioritize engaging the 85% of their staff who are already, productive and content in their jobs. It's about recognizing and nurturing the talent they already have.
That's a really interesting point. It's almost like shifting from, filling holes to cultivating growth. But how can they do that when so many institutions are dealing with budget cuts and, shrinking resources?
It's a real challenge for sure. Budget cuts often mean fewer resources for HR departments, and that makes it tougher for them to build relationships with potential candidates and, just to do the work of recruiting effectively.
So it really sounds like the landscape has shifted dramatically. What does all of this mean for how universities actually have to think about attracting talent now?
Well, I think one challenge is that there's this gap between perception and reality. There's this image of universities as being these idyllic places with lots of stability, purpose-driven work. And while that can be true, I think the perception, especially among younger generations, has really changed.
You're right, and the research shows that millennials, Gen Z, certain minority groups, they have some real concerns about higher ed culture and compensation. They're not necessarily convinced that it's the dream career path it once was.
Absolutely, and that makes attracting diverse talent even more challenging. Universities really have to work harder at communicating the unique value and rewards of working in higher education. And they also have to be willing to address issues like salary and work-life balance.
So it's not just about changing recruiting tactics, it's about changing the overall image of higher ed itself.
Right, it's a tall order. But if universities want to stay competitive in this new world of work, it's essential.
So we've established that the old ways of doing things just aren't going to cut it anymore. What can universities do to really get ahead of the curve and attract the best and the brightest?
Well, it all comes down to being proactive. They can't just sit back and wait for applications to come in. They need to be actively seeking out and engaging with talent even before there's an open position.
So it's almost like building a network of potential candidates.
Exactly like building a talent pipeline. And that means thinking outside the box, expanding the search beyond traditional boundaries, tapping into global talent pools, embracing all of this new virtual recruiting technology, and of course, prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion every step of the way.
It seems like adaptation is the name of the game.
hmm
Universities need to adapt to the way people work now, especially in a more remote first world. So what else are you seeing in terms of strategies that are actually working?
One of the biggest things is offering flexibility and competitive salaries. If universities want to attract the best people they have, to be willing to meet candidates where they are both literally and figuratively.
So it's not just about filling a job. It's about building a long-term relationship with someone, finding those people who are the right fit and who can really thrive in that environment.
Exactly, and that brings us to another really critical element, investing in employee learning and development.
Right, because professional growth shouldn't just stop once you land the job.
Absolutely. It's especially crucial in a remote work environment where people might feel disconnected. Studies show that people are more likely to stay with an employer who invests in their professional development.
Like that statistic from LinkedIn where they said something like 94% of employees would stay longer if their employer was helping them learn and grow. That's a huge number.
It really shows you that learning and development are just as important for attracting and retaining talent as they are for student success.
So we've got proactive recruitment, competitive benefits focus on learning and development. It's a lot to juggle. But there's one more piece of the puzzle, right? The candidate experience. How important is that in today's world?
It's more important than ever. Every interaction matters, from the first point of contact to the onboarding process and beyond. Universities need to create exceptional experiences for both candidates and their current employees.
So it goes back to that idea of building long-term relationships. You want people to feel valued and supported at every step, whether they end up taking the job or not.
Exactly. It's about making a positive and lasting impression that reflects the values and the culture of the institution.
So communication, transparency are key here.
Absolutely. And, we'll be delving into that even more deeply as we continue exploring higher ed hiring strategies.
This is already so insightful. Before we move on, let's just recap what we've learned so far. We've talked about, this changing landscape of higher ed hiring, this disconnect between perception and reality, the need for proactive recruitment, the importance of investing in learning and development, and really creating a stellar candidate experience. It's a lot to process. But before we dive into the next part of our deep dive, I have a question for you to think about. If you were in charge of a university's hiring, what one strategy would you prioritize based on what we've talked about today and why? We'll be back in just a moment to continue exploring this fascinating world, so stay with us.
Welcome back to our deep dive into higher education hiring.
I'm really curious to hear about, some real-world examples of universities that are successfully implementing some of these strategies.
Yeah, I think a great example is technology. We're seeing really innovative uses of these virtual recruiting platforms to reach a much wider pool of candidates. And that's especially crucial, when you're thinking about tapping into those global talent pools or attracting more diverse applicants.
It's like breaking down the geographical barriers and kind of those outdated networks.
Exactly. And it's not just about finding those candidates, but also making the hiring process a lot more efficient and engaging. So virtual career fairs, online assessments, video interviews, all of these tools can help to streamline things and make it a lot more accessible for both the candidates and the hiring managers.
It's almost like a matchmaking service for jobs.
Yeah, hopefully with a better success rate. But speaking of finding the right match, I think, a strong employer brand is absolutely essential. Universities really need to showcase their unique value proposition. What makes them a standout employer? What are their strengths?
It's like a marketing campaign, but for talent instead of students.
Exactly. You've got it. They need to highlight their strengths, things like academic freedom, research opportunities, commitment to social impact, and they need to communicate those things effectively to the right audience.
Right. And I imagine that messaging probably needs to be tailored for different generations and demographics. What resonates with a Gen Z candidate might be totally different from what appeals to a seasoned professor.
Absolutely. It's about understanding the motivations and the priorities of each group. For younger generations, it might be work-life balance, professional development, diversity, and inclusion. For those more experienced professionals, it could be the prestige of the institution or the impact that they can make.
So a one-size-fits-all approach is just not going to work here.
Right. You have to be really strategic and thoughtful. And that's where data and analytics come in. Universities need to be tracking their metrics, analyzing what's working, and then adjusting their strategies accordingly.
It's almost like applying the scientific method to hiring.
That's a great way to put it. And the beauty is you can constantly be improving your processes and making better decisions about, resource allocation.
Are there any universities out there that you think are doing this really well, kind of setting a good example for others?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Arizona State University is one that often comes to mind. They've been recognized for their really innovative talent acquisition, particularly their use of technology and their focus on a diverse and inclusive workforce.
So what are some of the things that they're doing that really set them apart?
Well, they've really embraced those virtual recruiting tools. They use online platforms for virtual career fairs, and they're connecting with candidates all over the world. They also have a really sophisticated talent relationship management system to nurture those connections and build a pipeline of potential candidates.
So it's really about using the technology strategically to build those long-term relationships that we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. And they're also really intentional about diversity and inclusion. They have a lot of really active employee resource groups for different affinity groups. They do unconscious bias training for their hiring managers. They're really putting a lot of effort into creating a welcoming and inclusive workplace.
It's great to see those values actually being put into action.
Yeah.
Are there any other universities that are kind of standing out to you?
Yeah, another good example is UC Berkeley. They've made some really big strides in their hiring practices, really focusing on transparency and equity. So they have a really robust system for tracking their diversity metrics, and they're holding their hiring managers accountable for building diverse teams. They're also really transparent about their salary ranges, which, ensures fairness and helps them to attract a wider pool of candidates.
Transparency builds trust, and it allows those candidates to make really informed decisions.
Absolutely. And Berkeley is also a leader in promoting work-life balance and employee well-being. They offer flexible work arrangements, childcare assistance, mental health support. They really understand that happy and healthy employees are going to be more productive and engaged, and ultimately that benefits the institution as a whole.
It's almost like they're treating their employees with the same care and investment that they give to their students.
That's a great observation. I think it reflects a broader trend in higher ed, which is a more people-centric approach to talent management. It's not just about filling positions anymore. It's about creating a workplace where people feel valued, respected, and supported.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
Happy employees are more likely to stay. They're more likely to grow, and they're more likely to contribute to the institution's success.
Exactly. Investing in your people is one of the smartest investments you can make.
We've covered a lot of ground here, talking about the challenges of higher ed hiring and these innovative strategies that universities are using to attract and retain talent. But I feel like there's one piece that's still missing, and that's the role of technology.
You're right. Technology is playing an increasingly important role in higher ed hiring, and it's only going to grow in the future. But it's important to remember that technology is just a tool. It's not a magic bullet. The key is using it strategically to enhance those existing processes and make them more efficient and effective.
So it's not about replacing human interaction. It's about using technology to make those connections more meaningful and impactful.
Exactly. Think of it as a way to extend your reach, streamline your workflows, and gather data so you can make better decisions. But at the end of the day, it's still all about people. It's about building those relationships, understanding motivations, and creating a really positive experience for everyone involved.
And that leads perfectly into our next discussion about some of the specific technologies that are really transforming higher ed hiring. Let's explore how these tools are shaping the future of talent acquisition in higher education. We're back and ready to dive into those technologies that are reshaping higher ed hiring. Are we talking like robots reviewing resumes now?
Not quite robots, but artificial intelligence. AI is definitely making a big splash. It's being used to screen resumes, analyze applicant data, and even conduct some of those initial interviews.
AI interviews, wow, that sounds pretty futuristic and maybe a little intimidating.
Yeah.
How does that actually work?
Well, these AI-powered tools, they can assess things like candidate skills, personality traits, and even cultural fit based on their responses to, preset questions. It's like having a virtual assistant help narrow down that giant applicant pool.
So it's more about efficiency, not necessarily replacing human judgment altogether.
Right, exactly. AI can help identify those promising candidates based on, very specific criteria, but human recruiters are still the ones making those final decisions. It's about augmenting human expertise, not replacing it.
That makes sense. It frees up those recruiters to focus on, those more strategic aspects of hiring, like building those relationships, understanding candidates' motivations.
And it can also help to reduce bias in the hiring process by really focusing on those objective criteria.
Which is a huge advantage.
Yeah.
So besides AI, what other tech tools are universities using these days?
Social media is becoming a really, really crucial tool for recruiting. Platforms like LinkedIn, Twitter, even Facebook are being used to connect with potential candidates, advertise open positions, and really showcase the institution's culture and values.
So it's like social media is this giant virtual job fair now.
Exactly. It allows universities to target very specific demographics and reach a much wider audience than those traditional methods ever could. And it's also a great way to engage those passive candidates, the ones who aren't actively looking, but who might be open to new opportunities if the right one came along.
Because sometimes the best candidates aren't the ones who are actively searching.
Right. Social media can help pique their interest and get them thinking about, a potential career move. It's all about building that brand awareness and creating some excitement around working at the institution.
So it's not just about posting job ads. It's about showcasing the institution's personality and appeal.
Exactly. It's about telling stories, highlighting employee achievements, giving those candidates a real glimpse into what that community is like.
You're building community before you even have them in the building.
That's a great way to put it. And another really interesting trend is using online platforms to actually create these virtual communities for specific professions or academic disciplines.
What are these virtual communities like?
There are these online spaces where professionals can connect, share knowledge, discuss industry trends, and even explore, job opportunities. It fosters this sense of belonging and it creates a really targeted talent pool for specific fields.
Like a specialized LinkedIn for a certain niche.
Exactly. And universities can tap into these communities to connect with potential candidates who are already passionate about their field and who really want to make a difference.
So you're finding people who are already aligned with your values and your mission.
And it's an excellent way to build those long-term relationships that we keep coming back to.
So we've got AI screening tools, social media, recruiting these virtual communities. Technology is really transforming how universities approach hiring.
It is. And the key takeaway here is that technology can be an incredibly powerful tool to help universities attract and retain top talent. The challenge is using these tools strategically and ethically to really enhance that human element of hiring.
Which brings us back to the importance of human judgment, empathy, personal
Totally.
connections, qualities that no algorithm can really replicate.
You're absolutely right. In the end, hiring is about finding those passionate people who are excited to contribute to the institution's mission. Technology can help, but it can never replace that human touch.
This has been a fascinating deep dive into higher ed hiring strategies. The landscape is definitely changing rapidly, and universities need to be adaptable, strategic, and really people-focused in their approach to talent acquisition. As you navigate this evolving world, remember that there are resources available to help you. One such resource is academicjobs.com. It's more than just a job board. It's a higher ed recruitment solution for universities and colleges. You can list all of your higher ed jobs on academicjobs.com for a really affordable price, making it a cost-effective way to reach a broader audience of those qualified candidates. So whether you're embracing the latest technology or refining your existing processes, remember that investing in your people is always a wise investment. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep striving to make higher education a place where everyone can thrive.